Well, it's great to hear all of the fellowship going on, and I hate to interrupt it, but we do have a lot of information we want to present to you in the next 45 minutes. And it is actually my privilege and honor to speak for the elders and the ministers this morning and talk about where we are at this moment in time. It is a very unusual moment in time. And your elders and your ministers have spent quite a bit of time over the past 2 or 3 months talking about where we are and what might be next, and wanting to communicate with you about our thoughts on that. And the material that we have this morning is really intended first to remind us of some things that are important, things that we reminded ourselves of as we got grounded around what do we think of Brighter Together, both the big concept of Brighter Together and also the construction project that we have been taking on since we started Brighter Together. And so you're going to see in this content several different sections, starting with a section of reminder. And we wanted to present this with the understanding that some of you may have never seen this content before, that you maybe have joined this congregation since there last was an elder update or a guiding principles class that you could attend. And so we don't want to take anything for granted around what you may know or understand from our objectives, our kingdom objectives, and what things that ground us in the things that we have purposed to do. So the first thing that I want to do is to remind you, as we reminded ourselves, of our congregational strategic kingdom priorities that we have. And these have been in place for about 15 years when we went back and started to think about what are our specific priorities for us at this place in the kingdom, the things that we have purposed to do. And the first thing is that we want to continue to be a growing and distinctive New Testament church. We've heard from some people that think that you can't be both a growing church and a distinctive New Testament church, that somehow you have to compromise along the way. We don't believe that's true. We think we can be both growing and big and still be a distinctive New Testament church. And so one of our foundational purposes is to continue to ground ourselves. We have guiding principles that you have access to that Mark uses whenever he's introducing a new member to our congregation, that really list out what are our priorities and how do we want to continue to be that New Testament church. We have a tremendous gift in the property that we're on, and we want to maximize the use of that property, the strategic location that we have here in the Metroplex, to grow and serve our metro community. We're placed in such a way that we have a community right around our building that's vibrant and growing and diverse. We also live in an increasingly diverse Metroplex area, and we're positioned in such a way that we can serve a large portion of that Metroplex area. It's very easy to drive to get to this building. And that's on purpose. Our church planters chose this property specifically because of its location between 75, between the North Dallas Tollway, between what they didn't know would become the Sam Rayburn Tollway running along our north. And so we are very, very strategically located. We've always been about nurturing families and nurturing students. And one of the benefits of that is that it continually refreshes your congregation. So we love to hear the crying babies in the congregation, and they remind us of the youth of the congregation, and they remind us of the next generation, and that next generation is now, which was the name of our campaign that we used to build our children's education building. We've always had at the heart of what we want to be about, to be able to have the majority of our resources that are committed to Great Commission's activities. And it's also a pleasure to be talking to you about these concepts on Mission Sunday, because Brighter Together goes straight to the heart of the Great Commission. I think Mark mentioned this morning that about 20% of our giving goes directly to foreign missions, some of the missions that have been identified specifically this morning. We think of resources bigger than just the resources that are given, although those are certainly very important, but resources are our people, our activities, our campus. How can we be using all of our resources, the majority of our resources, for Great Commission's activities? And we do have an ambition to plant distinctive New Testament churches at the right time. Some of these things are aspirational priorities, things that we have yet to do. Many of these things are very much in progress. but we will continue to track our progress against these objectives. We also want to remind ourselves of our scriptural grounding, our anchor points to Scripture. And we have several that are here, but it begins, and it's so appropriate to begin this way on Mission Sunday, with the Great Commission, that our objective is to be about the business of making disciples as we go. So on this journey that we have as a church family together at McDermott Road, we should be about the business of making disciples. And what it looks like to make disciples is that not only do you bring them to Christ, you bring them to Christ's body. And for us as a body, we want to be walking in a manner worthy of our calling, with humility and gentleness and patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace, because there is only one body, one Spirit, and we're called to one hope. And we know that as a body, each of us has been gifted by the Spirit individually to do certain things, and that collectively we've been gifted by the Spirit to do certain things. And that we're called within that body to use the gifts that we have for kingdom purposes. For as one body, we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Let us use them. Brighter Together is all about us coming together and using our individual gifts and our collective gifts that we have to do acts of mercy and cheerfulness. And the end result that we're going for with Brighter Together doesn't really have to do with statistics or buildings or a campus, but it has to do with maturity. That during this journey, but especially at the end of the journey for all of us, that our proclaiming, our exhortation, our teaching, the wisdom that we can impart to one another is to the objective of having every single one of us be presented mature or complete in Jesus Christ. So from the Great Commission to maturity in Christ, the objective of Brighter Together is to bring us together as a body to do that. There are some specific ways in which we do that. And one of those is the way in which we construct and run our campus. Some of the things that you heard about this morning, or you will hear about in the sermon this morning, have to do with what we are doing here to reach out, whether it's to community, locally, within our nation, or across the world. And it's so encouraging to hear those stories. But as we were thinking about our campus and the way in which we would construct facilities, we had certain guideposts in mind that help us to make decisions about how we build buildings. The first is that we want every building on this campus to be about the business of spiritual transformation. What things are going on within our various campus buildings that inspire and facilitate spiritual transformation? We're not just getting together to have fun and fellowship, although those are super important. But how does fun and fellowship drive spiritual transformation? How do we sharpen each other like iron sharpens iron when we're together? In whatever that is, whether it's a worship service or a Bible class or a fellowship or event, something that happens during the week, just having fun together, we're doing that as a body, sharpening one another. So spiritual transformation. We want to do everything we can to encourage participation. So we're going to design Bible classes to encourage participation. We're going to design a children's education building that has kids being together and participating and learning together and having activities together. That building we just built for our youth and our counseling center is all about participation, the very design of the building. When we build a worship space, we want to build it in such a way that it encourages participation in worship service, not just being an audience and listening to somebody present or to have somebody sing to you, but that we're singing to one another and we're praying with one another and that we're able to participate in everything that we're doing. We want our buildings, our campus, our events to be constructed that way. And we also realize that we have a stewardship mandate, that we have to take care of the resources that we're given, the property that we have, the campus that we have, and we have to make wise decisions with our money. We have to make wise decisions with how we use this property for kingdom purposes. And so the stewardship obligation that we have is to be smart and wise about the resources that we have. You may remember that when we started Brighter Together back in 2018, when we first started thinking about this, we had some construction objectives for that campaign and that process that we've been going through, and that we listed those out. And in 2019, we found that our hopes and objectives were a little bit too broad for the resources that we had, so we narrowed those down a little bit. But here's what we said that was important to us. Number one, that we needed to replace that modular building. And if you came in from the south door, you can see that it's moving out, right? The space where it has been is starting to be cleared. I didn't actually look this morning, but when I was up here earlier this week, 3 or 4 of the modules had been moved off the property, and at least 1 or 2 of them had left on a semi-truck. They're going to a new purpose. The church has actually acquired that, or not acquired, but taken possession of that and moved it off of our property, and they're going to repurpose it into use for them. So our beloved modular lives on, living a kingdom purpose, which gives me pleasure. But it was really important for us that we replace that building because it was well beyond its useful life and was getting in the way of our priorities, especially for our youth. And so that was the first objective. We also wanted to have a much better home for Dave Stevens and his counseling center. And if you've been back in that building, you know we did a really good job with that. And it's a much better place for people to come and to be served by our counseling ministry and by Dave. And that was a key objective. Our third objective that we had for Brighter Together was to provide a worship space for many more worshipers. As we made this full commitment in 2019, we were routinely maxed out in both of our services on Sunday morning. Had around 1,300 or so people that were worshiping, so that's on average about 650 people. Not always evenly spread between 2 services, which is part of the problem. But we were very much feeling the pressure of filled up worship spaces in 2 different services, and has our objective to solve that problem with a much larger worship space that would seat 1,360. And then one of the objectives we had in 2019 that we ended up deferring because the project was too big was additional accommodations for adult education space. We deferred that. You may remember from the original design that we had a building over here. We had the worship space over here. We had the youth center and counseling center. And it was a 2-story building with the top floor being for offices and additional adult education space. But we deferred that and had a design that had a smaller youth space and a worship space. We went to 2 phases and built the youth building. We decided to build it over here, and the worship space ultimately would be over here. So lots of changes in exactly how the plan would work, but the objectives remain the same. And you see, we gave ourselves 2 check marks for the top 2 objectives, that we accomplished those objectives. And so today, if you were to get an aerial view of our campus, that's the view you would see. You would see our original chapel, where we're sitting in today, the auditorium space that we have, our worship space, the children's education building that's over here to our west, and you see our new building to the southeast that is serving our youth and our counseling center. And you see a big spot where the modular building was, right? So that's the way that our campus looks today. Before we move on and talk about maybe what's next, it seems to me to be so appropriate for us to spend time in gratitude. Gratitude that we accomplished the construction of that building on time and on budget during a pandemic, which I would say is a bit of a miracle. We made a decision in late 2020 to proceed with building that building because of the pressing need that we had. That our youth were the first to be coming back and the first to need their space and to be bringing friends along with them that desperately needed connection, and the modular was not serving that purpose well. And we were also suffering a lot of maintenance issues with the building. So we made the decision in faith, in large part because of your generous giving to Brighter Together and continuing to support our needs every single week during the pandemic, that allowed us with confidence to proceed in building the building. And if we had not made that decision in late 2020 to proceed with building that building, it would probably not have been on time, and it certainly would not have been on budget, because construction costs are up 40 to 50%. So we're grateful to God for his providence and for leading us encouraged to make a decision to proceed with building that building. We achieved the outcomes that we targeted. It's flexible and open. If you haven't toured it, you need to go tour it. You need to walk through and just see the space. It's flexible, it's open, you can configure it in a lot of different ways to do a lot of different things. It encourages participation, and you see it happening if you go over there during class time and before and after, that fellowship is occurring and students are mixing and they're talking to one another and they're bringing their friends for that kind of connection that's so important. It does support spiritual transformation, that those lessons, those classes, those conversations, the time spent with our ministry staff, the time spent families and individuals working with Dave Stevens in our counseling center are creating the opportunity for spiritual transformation. And it creates a sense of family, that our youth feel like they're part of a youth Christian family. So we accomplished our objective. It's a much better environment for our counseling center. I know Dave appreciates his new home immensely. Better, more accessible offices for our road family ministers, so they're living amongst those that they're serving, and the students can gain access to them very easily, to have conversations, to talk about things that are going on in their life. They're accessible, and their offices are right there. And we created flexibility to use that space for other purposes besides when we're gathered for classes and worship. That we have the opportunity to use that space and have been using that space for things that happen during the week. And as you heard this morning, or will this morning, we host an Iglesia de Cristo over there. And they're able to use that space for their Sunday morning worship while we're doing our second service. And so the space has already begun to serve us very, very well. I mentioned the giving. The giving is what gave us the courage to decide to build that building. When we decided to build the building, I think we were about 70%, if I remember the thermometer properly. We sit here today having raised over $4 million of the 4.7 that we committed to give as a congregation, so we're about 86% of the way there. Thank you so much for your generosity. We have, as shepherds, felt so supported, and as I said, gave us a spirit of courage in committing to continue all of the things that we had purposed to do at the beginning of 2020, not cut back on anything that we didn't have to cut back on, as far as physically meeting together, things like that. But our missions, our activities, the things that we purposed to do, we were able to do because of your giving. And the Brighter Together construction that we purposed to do with the youth building, we were able to do. So thank you so much. Because of that generous giving, we were also confident in raising our budget this year. So Quentin made an announcement earlier this year that said we were increasing our budget because we felt like we had a need to give a cost of living adjustment to our staff and our ministers. And we were right about that. Inflation is a very real problem for a lot of people and certainly for our staff. And so we feel really good about making that decision. We feel really good about the fact that you are giving above that budget that we set. So thank you so much for your generosity. Once again, it gives us a spirit of courage. The budget itself is available on the transaction counter or the information counter that's out in the foyer. So if you want to pick up, it's a single page front back, and it will give you the details of exactly where our money is going, including that 20% of our resources going to foreign missions objectives. But Quentin told me that over the past 3 years, between our Brighter Together giving, not just the commitments, but the giving, and our budget giving, and any special gifts that have been given across that 3-year period, this church has given $12 million to kingdom activities. That's a big number. So thank you so much for your generosity. Also, generosity comes in other ways besides giving money. You've given your time, your talents, your resources, and we also sit here today on the last Sunday of our elder nomination process window where you can nominate men to be elders, having gotten above that 30% participation rate, so thank you so much for that. You still have 1 day left. So I encourage you to, if you haven't, fill out a card, drop it in the box, or go online and do it online. This is your last day. But thank you for participating. We look forward to the next steps in that process. We want to talk about, and this was really a big focus for us as we met together in March, to really first start thinking about what's next and what do we want to talk to the congregation about that we want to do to be brighter together and how would that affect our construction objectives as we think about the future. And the first thing that we came up with was a little bit of a list of things that we just don't know right now. This continues to be, as all of you know, a time of tremendous uncertainty. There's just a lot of things that are up in the air. We don't know what the economic cycle is going to be like over the next 3 to 5 years. And anybody that tells you that they do, I don't know what their agenda is, but there probably is one, because they don't know. We don't know, right? We can look at this moment in time and we can see inflation, we can see rising interest rates, we can see the potential for recession, we see world conflict and the Russia-Ukraine situation that was mentioned this morning. There's just so much uncertainty. And it is a good reminder that we always live with that kind of uncertainty, that we're not in control and God is in control, but this moment in time is especially impressing upon us that there's a lot more that we don't know than what we do. If the pandemic changes that we've noticed in the way that people engage with church broadly and also here at McDermott are going to be permanent, is a high percentage of virtual engagement our new normal or not? Are people going to come flocking back to in-person events as they get more and more comfortable with the idea that the pandemic is behind us, God willing, or that living with COVID is our new normal? We just don't know. It's very possible that we will continue to have a high percentage of people engaging virtually, as many are right now. But we don't know at this moment in time. We don't know what the role of virtual looks like for local church life and how we should be continuing to support people who live in our community but engage virtually. Some of whom have no choice but to engage virtually, who are in an assisted living center or otherwise shut in or immobile, and who've been blessed tremendously by what we've been able to do over the past 2 years, and thanks to Travis Polly for all of his amazing work in facilitating that. But we just don't know what the role of that is at this point, and we're exploring that. We don't know what the role of virtual is in Great Commissions activities. We know we have amazing tools to reach an amazing number of people. What is that going to look like over the next 3 to 5 years? And we don't know what the rate of our post-pandemic growth will be. If you look at where we are today, we have about 750 members worshiping in person across 2 services. And so we have a high number as well that are worshiping online. But we don't know in 3 to 5 years whether we're going to be back to filling up our 2 services and feeling that pressing need again. But right at this moment, we don't have that pressing need. Here's some things we think we know. We know that inflation is significantly impacting construction costs. If we were building that youth building today, it would be 40 to 50% more expensive than it was to build. Okay? That's really staggering for a 1-year period to see that kind of explosive increases in costs associated with construction, even more than general inflation. Construction, for any of you that are trying to build a house or buy a house, you probably already know this. Interest rates are increasing, which increases the cost of debt, but it also increases the money that you make on cash that you have. So that comes into our thinking as we think about the future. I already said the pandemic has changed the way people engage with church. We know that. We don't know exactly what to do with that completely, but we have some thoughts. This was interesting to me. At least 1/3 of our Sunday morning worshipers are virtual every Sunday morning. We have about 750 members right now on average worshiping in person. We have about 350 homes that are worshiping virtual. And no real way to know whether those homes are 1, 2, 3, or 4-person homes. So that tells you that we probably have at least 1,200 members that are actually worshiping with us on Sunday morning, of which 750 are actually here on campus. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? We know that virtual can be broad and meaningful, especially for those that have no other alternative, but it's also limited. And we found some of those limitations. That you can be in your home and you can be worshiping and you can see the people that you're worshiping with and you can sing along and you can participate, but still virtual is pretty one-way today. It's difficult to engage virtually. That presents an opportunity, not just a challenge. We discovered over the past 2 years that place is important in church life. The notion that you belong to a place and have access to a place, and that you can come together for connections, And connections are so important, so critical. We found out families need church community more than ever. That the lack of connections especially affects our young people. And when they don't have connections to one another, and even more importantly, connections to a church family where they can be nurtured, where they can grow spiritually, to be transformed, we have a tremendous loss. And so one of the things that we've heard as shepherds over the past 2 years is how important it is for family to have place and connections. And it affects our thinking about what's next. What are we doing next? I also believe, and your shepherds believe, that Great Commission opportunities abound. In periods of distress, in periods of transformation, when things are changing a lot, there are challenges, but there's also huge opportunities. People are finding out the limits of virtual. They're finding out the limits of when you're restricted in your movement. They're thinking about what are their top priorities for when they do spend time out. Having to think about what we're doing with our resources, because inflation is having to affect all of us in the way that we think about our spending. There are challenges and there are also opportunities, and there's opportunities for us to have a kingdom impact in this world at a time when people are, I believe, desperate for meaning and for the presence of God in their life, because so much of what we think of, our foundations are eroding underneath us. So people will be turning back to God, and we have an opportunity to be there for them when they do. We know we don't currently need a big worship space for the reasons that I just mentioned. 750 people worshiping in person today, a third of our congregation worshiping virtual, and we don't know what it's going to look like next year or 3 years from now. But we know at this moment in time, unlike where we were in 2019, we do not feel a pressing need to have a bigger worship space. And we also know we simply can't afford to build it. 40 to 50% increase in costs makes that building a $14.5 million project. If you look at the cash that we have from Brighter Together that we didn't spend on that building, plus the debt capacity that we believe that we have about $6.5 million of a $14.5 million project, so that gives you an $8 million gap. So even if we wanted to build that space today, we don't have the means to build it today. So we think God's telling us two things. One, that's not a pressing need that we feel at this moment. And God is telling us this would be a very unwise decision for us to make, to commit to doing that with that big of a gap. In fact, it would not be possible. So what are we going to do? We're sitting at a crossroads at a moment in time where the thing that we purpose to do, we can't do next and probably shouldn't do next until we have more information. So we're going to have to give that some time and let's see how things evolve. But I wanted to ask a question for you. Is our campus telling us something right now that we should be listening to? If you look at that current campus, the investments that we've made, the choices that we've made, how we built it out, how we use it today, is it speaking to us? Let's go on a little tour. Let's pretend that a couple shows up on a Tuesday afternoon. They say, we just moved to the area. We just live out here in this neighborhood. We saw this church. We're interested in your church. We wanted to come and see your church. And Mark happens to meet them over here at the door, and they tell him that story. And Mark says, well, the church isn't gathered here right now, but I'll show you our facilities. Let's walk through and see, right? And so Mark's going to show them. And since they started out there, we're going to walk through our facility. And we're starting out in this new youth building. And they're going to walk them through and say, here's where our older students gather for class time and fellowship and during the week. Oh, by the way, we also are able to use this space for a Spanish-speaking Iglesia de Cristo to meet here as well. You can see that it's open and it's inviting, and people can sit down and mix at a table before class, after class. When it's time for class, they're going to be able to come into a space that is light and open and well-equipped to hold a large class. You'll see a divider wall that can be pulled out, so if you need 2 classes, you can set up 2 classes. It's also a great place for a small congregation to worship, which is exactly what happens every Sunday morning. And it's a beautiful building. Our ministers are right there in the midst of the students, serving them and accessible to them. And also at the back part of that building, we have a counseling center that is free to our members to use when they need the assistance of somebody to help them through a rough patch, to help a family deal with problems that they may be having, to have somebody who is a strong believer with a strong Christian approach as a foundation for their counseling activities to help those in need. It's a resource that we make available to our members and our families. And then as we walk out of that space, you'll notice that we have this small fellowship area that we have. It also has all these movable walls, so we can use it for a classroom or for worship service to be streamed over there in case somebody needs to be sitting in that area. But it's a small worship or a small fellowship space that is very flexible for us. You see all the places where you can put walls up and turn them into adult classrooms. And you can see that it's certainly set up right now for a classroom that we'll likely be having tomorrow night on Wednesday night. As we walk through and come into this hallway, we're going to peek into a classroom because the walls are set up for a classroom to happen tomorrow night. So adult education happens in a partition or more partitions that are over here. And we can do the same thing in this part of our worship space as well and divide it up into classrooms. And you see that from inside here as you look across over there. That's what that partition would look like. So when those walls are up for classes, then our worship space is smaller. But worship is still really important to us, and so we tried to create an environment that encourages full participation in worship and for the idea that we serve an amazing and wonderful God, and the space should actually reflect that. We're going to walk out this door, and we're going to walk down the hall. We're actually going to go outside and come back into the next building, which is our Young Student Center, our Children's Center. This building, as you go up those stairs, you're going to see a check-in station below the stairs where we're keeping our kids safe. We're checking them in. We know where they are, what class they're in, who brought them, and who's going to pick them up. There's a place upstairs for parents to wait for their kiddos as they come out of class, or just have fellowship area up there and a seating area to make it comfortable for families that are dropping kids off, picking them up. And as we walk around, we're going to look down and see that we've put an area in that space specifically for kids to have fellowship and play with one another. And to be in fellowship while their parents can be on the outside fellowshipping themselves while the kiddos are having a great time. And you see that big open space, which we can also use for fellowship events or weddings and have in the past. You walk down a classroom hallway and you see the brightly decorated murals and the pictures that invite kids to come in and learn about God with scriptures on the walls and classrooms that are equipped to not only teach them about Jesus Christ, but to do that in a fun environment that engages them to be what? Participating, right? And you go down Sunday morning, those hallways, and you hear the participation. It's a wonderful noise. It's a wonderful noise. Also, if you walk around the other side of that second floor in the building, you'll see a couple of spaces where we're currently using for adult education. We just don't have the space otherwise, so we're using a portion of that building to provide classrooms for adults. So yes, we have little kids up there, but we also have big kids up there too, in a space that, as you can tell, can be carved up into multiple classrooms. You walk down the stairways, you're going to see a place where we tucked in an office. Over the past 3 years, we built an office there for members of our staff. It also doubles as our welcome center, so if you walk in those doors, you've got information that's available there. Somebody will greet you with a smile on their face. But it wasn't originally intended to be an office. We kind of constructed it right there. And then if you look down the hall back towards the atrium here, you're going to see we also have tucked away offices for Wes and Mark. They weren't originally intended to be offices. They were nursery spaces in a classroom, but we turned them into an office in order to have a place for our preaching minister and our involvement minister and missions minister to at least have a space for them to be. And then we'll bring you back to the atrium and say, that's the tour. What do you think that visitor would say about our campus? What is our identity? What are our priorities? Families with young children, maybe? Families with older children? We've purposed and designed our facility to be nurturing young families and taking care of students as a top priority. And if you look at our spaces, most of them are dedicated to that purpose. And we've created flexibility to take care of our adult members But we've done that in such a way that we're tucking them away in space. That's flexible space, not purpose-built space, right? Somebody would leave this campus thinking, this is a church that cares a lot about family, right? And that's a good thing. But it also makes me wonder, do we have pressing needs that we should be thinking about right now that are more important right now than a big worship space? We do not have the right quantity or quality of adult education space. And those of you that are going to Bible classes during this time typically are finding yourself in a place where we've put up walls or converted a children's classroom to an adult classroom. And the more people coming to Bible class, the more difficult it's going to be for us to find places for adults to be studying together and connecting together. And we've even talked about the potential that we might have to go back down the street or across over here to a school in order to facilitate that. One of the reasons is because we have an exceptionally high percentage of people who are worshiping together and then staying for Bible class, which is a huge blessing, but it also presents a challenge. We just don't have enough community space. There's not a fellowship space in this building where even half of us can really gather for a meal or an event. We don't have a space that's really specifically set up for events that happen during the week. So we're having to convert space or use space that wasn't intended for that purpose. We said that one of our top priorities was to be spending the majority of our resources on Great Commissions activities. But when you tour this building, other than seeing a few bulletin boards that highlight our mission activities, you're not going to see any focused area on outreach and missions. The equipping that we're doing for outreach and helping people to learn World Bible School and Friends Speak and all these things that we're doing, it just happens in different corners of the building, and it's great that we're that flexible. But it doesn't really speak to the fact that this is one of our top priorities. And unlike our road family ministers, we don't really have appropriate offices for Wes and Mark. Those are some pressing needs that our campus is telling us. So here's what we're thinking about right now, and we'll be thinking about over the summer, or what options can we evaluate? We think there are two. One of them is defer the construction of the auditorium and instead build a phase 2 building that's about equipping and connecting. The space would be similar to the youth space that we have now, probably actually right out here in the gap between the youth space and where the auditorium was going to be, would probably be where we would put it. And it would be about adult education and connections for adults of all sizes and life stages. Young professionals, young marrieds, marrieds with children, empty nesters, senior saints. What are the activities that we want to do together that we're currently not facilitating? Flexible fellowship and event space where we can have dinners together, we can have events on campus, we can do that outside of Sunday morning or Wednesday evening if we want. And an outreach and mission center where we can not only showcase the work that we're doing in the local community in our foreign missions, but more importantly, be equipping people for that work in a purpose-built area and have some additional purpose-built offices. And we could do that without any additional fundraising. We have the cash, and we have, if we need to, the debt capacity to do that. It would be a much less expensive building than the worship center. And so, practically speaking, it's something that we could do without having to stretch. The second option is that we can reserve and manage our cash while we wait on God's timing for the next steps. And that's compelling as well, and it's something from a stewardship perspective that we'll be seriously evaluating. One of the things that's a blessing for us is that we locked in the debt that we used on that building at a very low interest rate. So about a year from now, we're going to be sitting there looking at our interest rate that we're paying on our debt, and it's possible that we'll be making more interest on our cash than we're paying in interest on our loan. So if we were to do that, then we would take a stewardship attitude to how do we manage cash in such a way that we are good stewards of God's resources. But we're going to be looking at those two over the next 4 to 6 months. One of the most important next steps is that we finish out Brighter Together by the end of the year. We're almost there. We need to go ahead and get that $4.7 million collected, have that money available either way for next steps, and meet our commitment as a congregation that we've made. And we're really there. So I'm very optimistic that it's going to be something we can get done by the end of the year to get to that 4.7. We will also be doing a lot of shepherd engagement. with you, with families, including some that we don't exactly know where they are. We know some families have left. We know some families have come. We know a lot of you are here. But there are many families we just don't know where they are. And so we're going to have to engage and reach out and connect and find out, where's everybody at? And what are their plans? What are their visions for their family? We want to form a committee to study ways to better connect and engage through virtual and try to figure out how to not make that so one way. We're going to have to get some smart people to think about how you do that, how you invite people to connect. While you're in a say, one-way virtual relationship, how can you create a two-way virtual relationship and create real engagement and connection? And that's going to be a big challenge, but I think we're up for it. And so we're going to want a committee of people who have skills in this area to help us think about how to do that. So we're just not broadcasting a television show. We're creating an engagement through a class or through a worship event. So we're going to look for people who want to be participating in that. Prayerfully consider our two options. Lots of prayer. We ask you to engage in that as well. We've got to investigate the cost in option one. We don't know how much it is. We have a guess, but we need to actually investigate the details. We're going to want to hear from you. Focus groups, surveys, we're going to come to you. We're going to ask your opinion. We're going to ask what you think. As we get more details, we're going to put that in front of you and ask what you think about that and the purposes that we've thought about for a space that we might build, or what your opinions are on what we should do next. And I want you to all look forward to another One Church service on September 18th of 2022. So Allen Event Center, we've done it before. We haven't done it since the pandemic. We're going to get together, one service, one body, worshiping together. Those of you that have been to one of those, I think we've had two. Oh, so amazing. I look forward to it. And then we're going to seek to make decisions and communicate in the fall. It's super important we come back to what Brighter Together is really all about. I've got 4 pictures here. The one on your left is a picture of getting ready for Thrive, bringing product in, food, items that go out to our local neighborhood over here in East Plano, and all of that happening there on the left. The top is a Friends Speak session where our sister Neva Russell is teaching someone how to speak English and using biblical content to do that. And so instructing and teaching someone about Jesus Christ at the same time that you're learning how to speak English. The bottom picture happened right here last month with a member of the Iglesia de Cristo that meets over here coming in after second service and having one of their young people baptized into Jesus Christ in that baptistry. And then the picture on the right is a person in Delaware that Rosemary Moore was studying with through World Bible School, who said, "This makes so much sense to me. I want to know Jesus Christ. What's my next step?" And Rosemary says, "Hey, you need to find a baptistry." And so they found a local Church of Christ, went and talked to that minister, made their confession in Jesus Christ, and were baptized in that baptistry because of World Bible School and Rosemary's study. That's Brighter Together, people. So as we think about our next steps, we're thinking about top of mind. We have kingdom work to do. We have an amazing place in the kingdom. We have an amazing body with talents galore. How do we put that to work? Steve, I'm going to ask you to come up and lead us in a prayer as we finish out class today. Be prayerfully considering what God is calling us to do next.
Let's pray together. Father, we are